The cathedral bells tolled with a solemn weight that seemed to press upon Lady Evelyn Harrow's ribs as she stood at the threshold of the oak doors. Morning light filtered through stained glass in fractured hues of gold and crimson, brushing her ivory gown with a softness she did not feel. From the moment she could understand language, she had been told this day would come, told it was her destiny to wed Duke Rowan Astorley, unifier of two ancient houses. She had learned to quiet her own longings and shape herself into the woman society expected. Yet as she waited for the doors to open, her breath felt fragile, as though borrowed. Inside, the cathedral hummed with restrained whispers, the sound of fans fluttering like restless birds. Nobles turned expectant eyes toward the entrance. Evelyn sensed their gaze through the door, felt their anticipation settle over her like frost. Her maid touched her shoulder in a gesture meant to steady, but it only reminded her how alone she truly was in this ritual of duty. When the doors swung wide, the scent of beeswax candles mingled with roses rushed toward her. She lifted her chin with a grace drilled into her since childhood, though her gloved hands trembled at her sides. The aisle stretched before her like a long, gleaming promise. At its end should have stood Rowan, handsome, composed, distant. Instead, the space beside the altar remained empty. A ripple of unease crossed the congregation. Evelyn stepped forward, each footfall echoing her rising dread. Her father stiffened in his pew, and her mother pressed a lace handkerchief to her mouth. Still, no groom appeared. Evelyn's heartbeat thudded against the boning of her corset, sharp enough to bruise. The archbishop cleared his throat. A murmur grew as the cathedral doors opened again. Duke Rowan strode in, his dark hair wind-tossed, his posture rigid. Evelyn felt her breath catch, not in relief but in warning. Something in his eyes, distant and shuttered, told her the world she knew hovered on the brink of collapse. He approached without offering his usual bow. Whispering guests leaned forward like spectators at a duel. Rowan stopped a mere arm's length from her, his jaw set in harsh lines. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low enough that only she and the nearest guests could hear, "I cannot go through with this." The words pierced her with the precision of a blade. For a heartbeat she merely blinked, her mind refusing to accept the meaning. A soft gasp rose from the congregation. Rowan's gaze flicked toward the back of the cathedral. Evelyn followed the direction only to see her friend, Leora Hale, standing near the last pew. Leora's cheeks were pale, her hands clasped, her eyes brimming with sorrow that felt strangely out of place. Rowan exhaled, as if confessing a sin. "I have chosen another. I will marry Miss Hale." Silence collapsed over the cathedral. Evelyn felt the ground tilt, though her body remained still. Years of training held her upright, masking the storm ravaging her chest. Her mother's hand trembled, and her father's expression hardened with humiliation. The whispers began, sharp threads weaving through the pews. "She has been rejected. Promised since birth. Imagine the shame. Astorley chooses the friend." Evelyn forced her lips into the faintest curve of composure. She curtsied as tradition demanded of a lady dismissed from an engagement, though every motion scraped against her breaking heart. She looked at Rowan, hoping for a flicker of remorse, but found only weary resolve. Leora stepped forward, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Evelyn recognized the tremor of guilt in her friend's posture, but betrayal lay too deep for sympathy. As Rowan turned away, the cathedral erupted into whispers. Evelyn walked toward the side door, her steps slow, her dignity clinging by a thread. Chandeliers blurred in her vision, their brilliance distorted by unshed tears. Outside, the cool air brushed against her cheeks like an apology. A carriage waited, though she had no memory of calling for one. She climbed inside, closing the door on the murmurs. Only then did her breath break, shuddering through her chest. Yet even here, she refused to weep. Tears, she believed, must be earned by love, something she had never truly possessed with Rowan. The carriage jolted forward, wheels grinding against cobblestone. Through the small window she glimpsed Leora stepping into the cathedral light beside Rowan, the pair framed by radiance. Society would devour the story by noon. Sketch artists would record her humiliation with the same relish they reserved for royal scandals. As the cathedral faded behind her, Evelyn pressed her palm against her heart, willing it to endure the weight crushing it. She had been shaped for duty, not desire, trained to obey rather than dream. Now, with her future shattered and her reputation poised for ruin, she wondered who she might become without the promise that had defined her since birth. The carriage turned onto Harrow Lane, lined with winter-bare trees reaching toward the sky. Evelyn felt a shift inside her, a small, stubborn ember refusing to extinguish. She sensed that somewhere beyond this moment, a different path waited, one unbound by expectations she had never chosen. Though the ache remained sharp, a quiet clarity settled within her like the first hint of dawn after a long night. Shame had struck first, cruel and merciless, but it would not be the end of her story. Just as the manor came into view, the coachman slowed. A lone rider stood in the road, holding something small and gleaming in his gloved hand. He offered it through her window without a word, a silver locket engraved with an unfamiliar crest. Evelyn hesitated, then took it. The rider vanished into the morning mist before she could speak. Her heart stuttered, caught between fear and curiosity. The locket was warm, as though pressed against someone's skin moments before. Inside was a single folded note with Rowan's handwriting. "Forgive me, Evelyn. I had no choice. Tonight." The morning after the ruined wedding arrived with an oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow every corner of Harrow Manor. Evelyn awoke to the distant clatter of hooves on the lane and the soft rustling of her maid drawing curtains, yet the sounds felt dulled, as though wrapped in wool. Sunlight spilled across her chamber in an indifferent sweep, illuminating the silver locket resting on her bedside table. She had not opened it again. Its presence felt like a stranger watching her sleep. Despite the note that claimed Rowan had no choice, she found herself unable to decide whether the trinket was an apology, a warning, or simply another wound disguised as sentiment. Her mother's voice rose faintly from the corridor, clipped and strained as she dismissed the morning callers who demanded updates on the scandal. Evelyn dressed with deliberate slowness, each button and ribbon a shield against a world she no longer trusted. The drawing room was flooded with the scent of lavender polish when she entered, her parents seated stiffly as though awaiting a tribunal. Her father's newspaper trembled in his hands, though his expression remained carved from stone. Evelyn's eyes were drawn to the front page, a caricature of herself abandoned at the altar, rendered with cruel flourish. The caption read, "The Forsaken Promise of Harrow." Heat rose in her cheeks, not from shame but from something fiercer, rawer. Her father folded the paper before she could study it further. "You must not dwell on this, Evelyn. Silence will protect us." But she knew silence could also destroy. She thanked him for his concern, though she sensed he offered it more for the family's reputation than for her heart. Her mother reached for her hand, offering a fragile smile that trembled along the edges. Whatever comfort the gesture held dissolved when a footman appeared, bearing a velvet box sealed with red wax. The box was small enough to fit in her palm, its weight strangely disproportionate to its size. The wax bore no crest, no signature. Her parents exchanged wary glances, urging caution. Evelyn broke the seal. Inside lay another token, a delicate silver locket, twin to the one delivered the previous morning. But this one held no initials, no inscription, only a faint fragrance of bergamot that did not belong to Rowan. Her mother's breath hitched. "Who would send such a thing?" Evelyn asked the footman, but he could only shake his head. "Left at the gate, my lady." Her father muttered that this was the beginning of gossip far uglier than the wedding incident. Evelyn closed the box, sensing that whoever had sent it knew more about her situation than she did. She felt the strange pull of a secret forming around her, tightening like a drawn curtain. Her suspicions sharpened that afternoon when another visitor arrived, one who did not request permission to enter but simply did. Lord Alastair Branford, the Marquis of Clydeford, stepped into the manor with the stern gravity of a man accustomed to grim revelations. Tall, dark-haired, and known for a reputation built on logic rather than charm, Alastair bowed with impeccable restraint. His gaze, though solemn, held neither mockery nor pity, qualities Evelyn had grown accustomed to seeing in the last 24 hours. "My lady," he said, "I come not to intrude, but to warn." Her father stiffened, demanding clarification. Alastair produced a newspaper clipping folded with precise care. It bore another drawing, this one of Rowan and Leora stepping triumphantly from the cathedral while Evelyn stood ghost-like in the background. But it was the article beneath that chilled her. It hinted at debts, political bargains, and a private agreement between Asterley and Hale, a union meant to secure financial salvation for Rowan's deteriorating estate. Evelyn read the lines twice, struggling to reconcile them with the boy she once knew, the distant but dutiful fiancé who had spoken little but never cruelly. "I do not share this to deepen your pain," Alastair said gently. "I share it because you deserve the truth." Her father dismissed the notion irritably, insisting such claims were nonsense. Yet Evelyn sensed Alastair's words held weight. His eyes lingered on her with an intensity that suggested he understood what it meant to be humiliated before the world. "Why bring this to me?" she asked. "Because you are not the failure in this story," he replied. "And someone hopes you will believe you are." A strange warmth stirred in her chest at the conviction in his voice. For the first time since the catastrophe, she felt seen, not as a symbol, not as a scandal, but as a person. Their conversation moved to the conservatory, where winter sunlight filtered through glass panes like muted gold. Surrounded by dormant roses and the faint scent of soil, Evelyn found her composure easing. Alastair walked beside her with measured steps, hands clasped behind his back. He explained that Rowan's sudden decision was less a matter of affection and more a response to threats, political and financial leverage she had never been told existed. Her pulse quickened at the implication that her life had been rearranged by forces she had never glimpsed. "My lady," Alastair said softly, "there are people who benefit from your downfall." She studied him, evaluating the sincerity etched into his features. His expression held a quiet urgency, as though he feared what might come next if she remained unaware. She realized he was not merely delivering information. He was positioning himself as an ally. Before he departed, Alastair paused in the threshold of the conservatory, his silhouette framed by pale morning light. "Evelyn," he murmured, his voice losing its formal edge, "you must look beyond the shame they handed you. What happened was not misfortune. It was orchestration." She felt the words settle deep within her, reverberating in places still bruised. "And what am I to do with such knowledge?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alastair stepped closer, lowering his tone. "Prepare yourself. The locket you received this morning was not the first warning, nor will it be the last." A shiver traveled through her, not entirely from fear. There was something steadying about his certainty, something she had not felt since before the cathedral doors opened. As he turned to leave, she called after him, "Lord Alastair, who orchestrates this?" He paused but did not fully face her. "Someone who expects you to remain silent while they pull the final thread." His gaze flicked toward the unopened velvet box on a nearby table. "Do not let them." And with that, he disappeared down the hall, leaving Evelyn standing among sleeping roses, her breath shallow, her hand tightening around the locket that no longer felt like a gift but a signal. The conservatory seemed to shrink around her as she realized the quiet of her home was not safety. It was the eye of a storm she had never chosen. That evening, as dusk spilled across the manor in bruised shades of violet, Evelyn opened the second locket at last. Inside lay a scrap of parchment bearing 2 words written in an unfamiliar hand, "Watch tonight." The storm rolled in shortly after dusk, sweeping across Harrow Manor with a restless fury that rattled window panes and sent shadows trembling along the corridors. Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, watching rain sheet across the gardens like a veil. The cryptic message hidden in the locket, "Watch tonight," burned in her thoughts, though she had no notion of what she was meant to witness. The wind howled against the glass, and thunder grumbled low, as if the sky itself sensed a revelation approaching. When the clock struck 9, a soft knock echoed through her chamber door. She startled, her breath catching. For a moment she feared another anonymous token had arrived, but then she recognized the silhouette in the hall. Lord Alastair Branford stood with rain-damp hair and a grave urgency in his eyes. "My lady," he murmured, inclining his head, "forgive the hour. I feared waiting until morning would place you in danger." Evelyn's pulse fluttered with an inexplicable mixture of relief and apprehension. She gestured for him to enter, noting the chill that clung to his coat. The lantern in her room cast a soft gold glow over his features, revealing an exhaustion not merely born of travel. "What danger could possibly await me in my own home?" she asked. Alastair removed his gloves slowly, as though considering how much truth to reveal. "The kind you do not see until it has already unraveled your life," he replied. His tone bore none of the polite detachment he carried earlier. Tonight, there was something urgent, almost personal. He asked to speak somewhere private. Evelyn led him through the quiet halls to the lantern room at the top of the manor, a small glass-walled chamber used for stargazing in gentler weather. The storm surrounded them on all sides, lightning illuminating their reflections in fractured bursts. Rain battered the glass like 1,000 frantic fingers. The room felt suspended between the world outside and the secrets they carried inside. Evelyn folded her hands, determined to confront him. "Why did you come?" Alistair met her gaze, his grey eyes bright with intensity. "Because you deserve to know what truly binds the Duke to Miss Hale, and why you were discarded so swiftly." Evelyn's breath paused. She had suspected financial pressure, whispered bargains, political maneuvering, but the depth of the betrayal remained unfathomed. Alistair drew a sealed envelope from his coat and placed it on the table between them. "These are letters intercepted from Astralea's steward. They speak of an arrangement prepared months before your wedding. The Duke did not act out of sudden passion. He acted out of fear." Evelyn stared at the envelope, unsure whether touching it would grant her power or break her entirely. "Fear of what?" she whispered. Alistair hesitated, then softened his voice. "Ruin. Scandal. But not his own, yours." The words struck her with bewildering force. She lowered herself into a chair, unable to bear standing. Alistair remained across from her, but his posture loosened as though he wished to ease her burden without crossing propriety. "Someone threatened him," he said quietly. "Someone threatened to expose a supposed transgression tied to your family's estate if the wedding proceeded." Evelyn shook her head, tears gathering despite her resolve. "We have no such transgression." "I know," Alistair replied. "But truth matters little when lies are crafted with precision." She pressed her palms to her eyes, willing the room to steady. For the first time since the cathedral, anger cut through her sorrow, sharp and clean. "So he abandoned me to save himself," she whispered. "Abandoned you before ever giving you the chance to defend your name," Alistair corrected. There was a gentleness in his voice she had not expected, a warmth beneath his usual restraint. Evelyn looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" The question hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Alistair inhaled slowly and stepped closer, stopping just short of impropriety. "Because I know what it is to be humiliated before witnesses who delight in your downfall." Rain streaked behind him like silver threads. "Years ago, I offered my hand to a woman who laughed at me, laughed before a crowd." His jaw tightened. "I learned then that dignity can be stripped in a breath, but rebuilt with brutal patience." Evelyn felt the ache beneath his words, an old wound revealed with reluctance. "And you believe mine can be rebuilt?" she asked. Alistair's gaze softened in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Yours was never lost." Thunder cracked, shaking the chamber. Evelyn rose from her seat, drawn by a current she did not fully understand. She moved to the glass wall, watching the storm ravage the gardens below. Alistair joined her in silence. The space between them felt alive with unspoken things. Fear, trust, something warmer she dared not name. Their reflections shimmered in the lantern light, almost touching. "I do not know how to be anything without the future that was promised to me," she admitted quietly. "Then allow yourself to be something for which no one prepared you," he said. His words carried a depth that unsettled and steadied her at once. Evelyn turned toward him, the distance between them narrowing until she could feel the warmth of his breath. Lightning flashed, illuminating him in stark brilliance. Alistair's eyes drifted to her lips before he pulled himself back with visible restraint. "Forgive me," he murmured, stepping away though longing flickered unmistakably across his face. "I will not be another man who takes what you did not freely offer." Evelyn felt a tremor within her, a shift she had not anticipated. "You assume I have nothing to offer," she said softly. Alistair's breath caught. "I assume you have not been allowed to choose what you offer." A silence settled between them, dense with possibility. The storm outside softened to a steady whisper, as though granting them a moment untouched by the world beyond the glass. Evelyn reached for the envelope on the table, feeling its weight anew. "These letters," she said, They reveal the truth? Alastair nodded. A truth dangerous enough that someone went to great lengths to hide it. She traced the seal with her fingertip. Then I must read them. Not yet, he said gently. You should not face them alone. She met his gaze, realizing she did not wish to face any of this alone. In the lantern light, his expression held a quiet promise she did not understand but instinctively trusted. The moment felt suspended, delicate, transformative. Then a sudden movement in the garden below caught Alastair's eye. He strode to the glass, his expression sharpening. Evelyn followed, heart quickening. Through the rain-streaked panes, a shadowy figure moved near the hedges, cloaked and deliberate, as though searching for something, or someone. Alastair's voice dropped to a tense whisper. Evelyn, you were right to be warned. Evelyn stood at the center of the abandoned hall, its vaulted ceiling echoing the rise and fall of her breath as though the room itself listened to her unspoken dread. The windows, tall and arched, cast pale ribbons of winter light across the floor, illuminating dust motes that drifted like unsettled memories. Alastair stood several paces away, shoulders rigid, fighting a war she could no longer bear to watch. Everything between them had been stretched thin, truth, loyalty, longing, until all of it quivered on the brink of collapse. She moved closer, each step steady despite the storm swirling inside her. You asked for truth, she said, her voice low but unwavering. And I have come to hear it. Alastair's eyes lifted to hers, dark with conflict. If I tell you, he said, it will change everything. It may break what little we have left. Evelyn shook her head, the tension in her chest stretching painfully. What breaks us is the truth you refuse to speak. He exhaled sharply, as though releasing years of restraint. I wanted to be the man you believed me to be, he said. I wanted strength, certainty, honor. But all I have ever been is a man terrified of losing what matters most. His admission struck her with unexpected force. Then why hide it? She whispered. Why let fear guide the one thing that could save us? Alastair stepped toward her, stopping only when the breath between them grew warm and shared. Because wanting you, he said, feels like stepping into a fire I cannot control. And losing you feels like a darkness I will never escape. Her heart faltered under the weight of words she had longed to hear and dreaded all the same. Then let the fire burn, she said. Let it consume what it must. But do not stand in the ashes and pretend you were never part of the flames. He reached for her hand, hesitant, almost reverent. If you stay, he murmured, I will fight for us with everything I have left. I will not turn away again. She felt the tremor in his touch, the sincerity threading through every syllable, the fracture in his guarded resolve beginning to mend. And if I fall? She asked. His grip tightened, a quiet promise shaping the air between them. Then I fall with you, he said. And in that suspended moment, Evelyn realized the world around them had shifted, though whether toward salvation or ruin, she could not yet tell. Alastair moved closer, his boots crunching over frost, each step marking a decision he could no longer reverse. I knew Eldrick intended to challenge my inheritance, he began, but I underestimated how far he would go to destroy me. Evelyn stiffened at the mention of the man whose presence had haunted every corridor of Asterley. He threatened to expose something he believed would ruin our family name, Alastair continued, a matter tied to my late father, one involving debts and accusations I had not yet managed to untangle. He paused, jaw tightening with old resentment. When he learned of my betrothal to you, he saw an opportunity. He convinced your friend that aligning with him would secure her a higher standing, promising her influence that he could never rightfully grant. Evelyn's breath caught. So she agreed, she murmured, the truth settling like a cold stone against her ribs. Alastair nodded, eyes dark with regret. I discovered the betrayal only days before the ceremony. Eldrick demanded I choose her publicly, or he would ruin not only me, but every person tied to my estate, and you most cruelly of all. Evelyn stared at him, horror threading through her pulse as she whispered, So you sacrificed us to shield me? His breath hitched, pain tightening every line of his posture. I believed it was the only way to keep you safe, he said, voice roughened by the memory. Had he carried out his threat, Your reputation would have been destroyed before your life with me had even begun. Evelyn felt a tremor of fury cut through her grief. You made that choice alone, she said. You did not trust me to face the storm with you. The garden wind swept between them, scattering brittle leaves that skittered like warnings across the flagstones. Alistair lifted a hand, then let it fall helplessly. I feared the burden would break you, he murmured. And in my fear, I broke us instead. Evelyn turned away, struggling to gather the fragments of herself still quivering beneath his confession. You were not meant to carry this alone, she whispered. I would have stood with you, even against Eldrick, even against the world. Alistair stepped behind her, the nearness of him stirring the air like a quiet plea. Then allow me now, he said softly. Allow me the chance to mend what I shattered. She closed her eyes, unsure whether the flicker in her chest was hope or the last glow of heartbreak. He moved to stand before her, and the earnestness in his expression struck her with more force than any plea. Evelyn, he said, I know I have forfeited much of your trust, but if you will grant me the chance, I will fight Eldrick openly. I will no longer hide behind silence or sacrifice. She searched his eyes, finding no shield, no practiced composure, only a man willing to risk everything. And what if he reveals whatever he holds? She asked. What if the scandal consumes us both? Alistair stepped closer, his hand rising to brush her cheek with a tenderness that unraveled her breath. Then we face it together, he said. I would rather endure ruin at your side than live unscathed without you. Her heart lurched, torn between yearning and the fear that still whispered its cruelties. You choose ruin so easily, she said. It is no small matter. Alistair shook his head. I am not choosing ruin. I am choosing truth. And you. Something in her resolve cracked, not in weakness, but in recognition. She had waited so long for him to speak words like these, words he now offered without hesitation, without deceit. Evelyn felt the fragile edge of her restraint give way as she reached for his hand, her fingers trembling against his warmth. Then hear me now, she said, her voice unsteady but fiercely sincere. If I stand beside you, it is not as a shield nor a sacrifice. It is as a partner who chooses you willingly, even knowing the storms you carry. A flicker of astonishment crossed his features, followed by a depth of tenderness that left her breathless. Then I am yours to command, he whispered. She shook her head gently. No. We command our fate together. He drew her into his arms, the winter wind curling around them as though bowing to the moment. For an instant, the world felt suspended, quiet, fragile, and luminous. But the spell broke when a distant shout echoed from beyond the garden wall. Alistair stiffened, turning toward the sound with a foreboding Evelyn felt in her marrow. Heavy footsteps approached, deliberate and cold. Then the gate swung open, revealing Eldrick himself, his expression sharpened with triumphant malice. How touching, he drawled. A declaration made too late. I trust you are both ready to hear what I have come to unveil. The courtyard was drenched in moonlight, silver spilling across the frost-kissed stones and pooling around the lanterns that swayed in the evening wind. Evelyn clutched Alistair's arm, her fingers tight against his sleeve, feeling the tremor of anticipation and fear mingling with the steady warmth of his presence. Beyond the wrought iron gates, the figure of Eldrick loomed like a shadow that refused to dissipate. His smug expression, sharpened by triumph, betrayed a man who believed he held all the strings of their fate. The quiet air thrummed with tension, each heartbeat sounding louder than the steps approaching through the gravel. Evelyn lifted her chin, forcing a calm she did not feel, and met Alistair's gaze. His grip on her hand was both protective and reassuring, grounding her in the storm she had anticipated for weeks. Eldrick stopped a few paces away, his boots crunching softly on frost-hardened gravel. "Ah, Lady Evelyn," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the confidence of someone certain the world bent to his will. "And Lord Brandford. How quaint that you both stand here as if the night itself could shield you from consequences." Evelyn drew a slow breath, the icy air filling her lungs, and stepped slightly forward, her gown whispering across the stone. "We are not afraid of truth," she said evenly, the words deliberate and controlled. "Nor of the lies you wield to frighten those you believe weaker than yourself." Eldric's lip curled, an amused sneer that revealed the arrogance which had so long fueled him. "Truth?" he mocked. "Do you speak of the letters? The debts? The scandal that would ruin families if revealed? You, standing here, are but a child who has learned to speak above her station." Evelyn's fingers tightened around Alistair's, drawing a quiet courage from his steady presence. "Perhaps," she said softly, yet each syllable carried weight, "but a child who has endured more treachery than you could ever imagine, and who will not bow now." Alistair stepped forward, his coat brushing against hers. "Eldric," he said, voice cold with precision, "your threats mean nothing here. You sought to divide, to manipulate, to control, but the truth you hold is meaningless in the presence of honor." Evelyn felt a surge of pride at the firmness in his tone, the way he protected not just her, but the dignity that had been nearly shattered by deceit. Eldric laughed, sharp and brittle, as if mocking courage itself. "Honor," he spat. "Do you think a woman's name or a man's title shields you from ruin?" Alistair's eyes narrowed, unwavering, his voice rising like steel. "It does not shield. It defines. And you have forgotten that virtue cannot be purchased or coerced. It is lived." Evelyn's heart thrummed in agreement, each pulse an echo of the battle she had endured in silence. Eldric's confidence faltered, just slightly, though he masked it quickly. "You speak boldly," he said. "Boldly and foolishly. Do you imagine the city will remain silent? That society will forgive a scandal of this magnitude?" Evelyn's gaze lifted to the night sky, the pale moon illuminating frost-laced branches. "Society is composed of whispers and shadows," she said. "It is not justice. It is not truth. I will not let its fear dictate the course of my life." Alistair's hand brushed against hers in quiet reassurance. He stepped closer to Eldric, voice edged with quiet power. "You have overplayed your hand. Your threats, your manipulations, they are transparent. Reveal your accusations now, if you must, but know this, nothing you say can undo what we have reclaimed." Evelyn felt the tension coiling in her chest, the slow burn of exhilaration mingling with fear. She had been humiliated, betrayed, and abandoned, yet here, in the shadow of frost and moonlight, she understood that the final measure of power belonged not to him, but to them. Eldric's eyes flickered, a hint of panic betraying the mask of superiority he had worn so long. "You will regret defiance," he hissed, stepping closer, his shadow falling over the stones like a dark tide. Evelyn raised her chin, meeting him without flinching. "We have already endured your machinations," she said, voice steady, "and yet we stand. You overestimated fear and underestimated the truth. Whatever ruin you believe you hold, your grasp is empty." Alistair's stance mirrored her resolve, a silent barrier, unwavering. "Consider this your final warning," Eldric snarled, but the uncertainty in his tone betrayed him. He took a step back, the calculated threat dissolving under the weight of their defiance. A hush fell over the courtyard, broken only by the wind whispering through frost-laden branches, and Evelyn felt the first true breath of victory in weeks. From her coat pocket, Alistair withdrew the letters Eldric had believed to be his power. Evelyn held her breath as he spread them carefully on the frozen stone, each one detailing the Duke's coercion and Eldric's own plotting. The evidence of deceit, manipulation, and lies lay bare in the moonlight, sharp and undeniable. Evelyn stepped forward, lifting one letter and letting its content flutter in the air like a confession made visible. "See, Eldric," she said softly, yet every word carried force. "Your schemes unravel in the light. Truth has weight, and it cannot be suppressed by threats or cunning." Eldric's face paled slightly, a recognition of defeat that twisted his features into something raw, unguarded. "This changes nothing," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Evelyn met his gaze, resolute. "It changes everything." The night seemed to hold its breath as Eldric finally turned, retreating toward the gate, his plan dismantled and powerless. Alistair closed the letters carefully, securing the evidence as if it were a shield they could carry forward. Evelyn exhaled, feeling the tension release like steam from a kettle long too tight. She turned to Alistair, seeing the relief mirrored in his eyes. "We have survived this," she whispered. "Together." His hand found hers, their fingers entwining, A tactile promise of partnership forged in adversity. Together, he echoed. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, casting a pale gold across frost-dusted gardens. Evelyn felt the weight of the past months lift gradually, leaving space for something tender, something fiercely alive. She looked at Alistair, the man who had stood beside her, defended her, and now shared the victory not as a protector, but as an equal. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of roses pruned for spring, the promise of renewal in the crisp air. Evelyn's heart swelled, not with relief alone, but with a profound understanding of agency, of choice reclaimed after years of manipulation and silence. Alistair leaned close, voice a soft murmur that seemed to rise above the awakening world. "We are not defined by what we endure," he said. "We are defined by what we choose, and who we choose to become." Evelyn nodded, her gaze lifting to meet the sunrise, the sky painted in trembling strokes of pink and gold. "Then let us choose wisely," she replied, the resolve in her voice carrying the quiet triumph of the night's ordeal. As they walked together toward the manor, the world awakening around them, Evelyn felt the certainty she had long craved. The scandals, the betrayals, the whispered judgments of society, all had lost their power. She held Alistair's hand firmly, feeling the warmth and strength that had been her anchor. Behind them, Eldric's shadow faded into the distance, impotent and irrelevant. Ahead lay the possibility of a life shaped by their choices, a future unbound by duty imposed or fear dictated. Evelyn understood fully that she had been promised many things since birth, but the most precious promise, the one she could honor and protect, was the one she gave to herself. And in the quiet dawn, with frost glinting like diamonds across the manor's gardens, she realized that she would never allow another to dictate the measure of her heart again. Yet even as the light spilled over the horizon, carrying warmth into the world, a distant figure watched from the edge of the trees, silent and unyielding. Evelyn did not see him yet, nor did she feel the presence, but the faint impression of movement lingered at the periphery of her awareness, a reminder that while one battle was won, the currents of fate rarely yield finality. And in that soft, unspoken truth, the air held both promise and caution, leaving her pulse quickened and her mind alert, ready for the chapters yet unwritten.